delay. We wanted to make sure that we have the capacity for all the participants who are joining today. So again, we're going to just allow people to get settled.
Oh, here we go. Here we go. Now they're coming.
Welcome, Chodesh Tov. We are very excited to be hosting Rabbanit Shani Tarragon. We're going to give people just a moment to settle in. We apologize for the delay. We wanted to assure that we had the capacity for a larger group. We are combining the Rosh Chodesh monthly program as well as kicking off the Yemei Ratzon programming. So we thank the OU technical support, Drew Feld and Rachel Leff and Alex Cook, for assuring that we were able to increase our capacity this afternoon. So we'll just give people a moment and we'll get started momentarily. Chodesh Tov, we are thrilled to be kicking off the Yemei Ratzon programming as well as our tapping into our regular Rosh Chodesh participants and be together on Rosh Chodesh Elul. It is particularly meaningful that we have Rabbanit Shani Tarragon with us, a voice that many of you are familiar with in her capacity as introducing each sefer that is being learned as part of the Torah Nimecha Nach Yomi program. But additionally, I wanted to make mention that Rabbanit Shani Tarragon kicked off our Rosh Chodesh programming 2 years ago. We have close to 2,000 participants for that program. And certainly we encourage each one of you to join at ou.org/women/RC for Rosh Chodesh. But in addition, this program is kicking off our Yemei Ratzon programming. For those of you who have signed up, we're very excited. Those of you who are coming in on the Rosh Chodesh program through that portal, please join us, ou.org/women/YR, Yemei Ratzon. We have a lot of programs that we're going to be running, video programming, audio programming, and we are thrilled to have Rabbanit Shani Tarragon with us on Rosh Chodesh Elul, the first day of Rosh Chodesh Elul, with us to share her thoughts of Teshuvah in a time of the pandemic. So without further ado, again, thank you, Rabbanit Shani Tarragon, a beloved educator and a voice that we certainly love and appreciate here at the OU Women's Initiative. So Chodesh Tov to each one of you, and we look forward to your participating in our Yemei Ratzon programming. And again, to support our programs, please go on to ou.org/women/donate.
Chodesh Tov, and in fact, the love is mutual, and both the Achsania, the OU, Rebbetzin Shmimon, thank you for this phenomenal opportunity, but really a schus to be able to share Torah, and particularly on Rosh Chodesh, not only as we know, as Chazal teach us, the holiday for women, a chag that women have preserved throughout the generations. Thereby, even if we see during the time of Tanakh, during the time of the first Beis HaMikdash, and even during the time of the second Beis HaMikdash, people refrained from malacha, from laundering, from working on Rosh Chodesh. It was only the women who really took advantage of this, and the women who, being very sensitive to time and to hitchatshut, to renewal, to HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chodeshim, to the opportunities that every new month avails oneself to. They're the ones who preserved not only not performing malacha, but truly celebrating the Rosh Chodesh. And therefore, it really is a phenomenal opportunity to share Torah, and particularly this year, as Rebbetzin Shmimon said, and after launching this, and through the OU 2 years ago, to have this opportunity to continue to teach Torah, and a special Mazal Tov and Yasher Kochachen for all those who were Mesaimot Sefer Yeshayahu last week, as we continue now with Yirmiyahu, which perhaps is extremely appropriate for this time period also of Elul. The perhaps most particular reason why I feel very, very privileged this Rosh Chodesh, maybe even more than any other, to be able to share Torah is because this is the time, as we know, dating back to Moshe Rabbeinu, who entreated upon HaKadosh Baruch Hu following Chet HaEgel for the 40 days from Rosh Chodesh Elul through Yom HaKippurim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, again, forgive these people. Hashem, show me, Hareini nat kvodecha. How am I going to somehow bridge this gap, the rift that has been formed between you and Am Yisrael? And upon Moshe's entreaties, Chazal teach us that this is going to set a precedent for all future generations until HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Salachti kidbaracha. And this year then in particular gives us an opportunity for Cheshbon HaNefesh. And the reason I say obviously this year in particular is because how can we not undergo introspection? When we're in the midst of a pandemic, as the Rambam tells us, anytime, a magefa in particular, anytime there's some type of pandemic that strikes you, you have to undergo some level of introspection. This is exactly when Teshuvah is necessary. And it doesn't always fall out on Rosh Chodesh Elul, but whenever it may be, that's when Chazal teach us, Yifashvesh Adam b'ma'asav. Go back and examine your ways. And therefore, this Rosh Chodesh Elul, I really asked myself, what is it? HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we've heard. I know we certainly have recognized you ruled the show. We know that already. We've seen that this little virus, and a corona, the crown as it's called, you're the one, Hashem, with Ketzer Mulucha. Yishai Ribo has asked, so yes, what is it, Hashem, that you want us to get? Didn't we get the messages already? Can we stop the social distancing and understand the lessons that we're meant to internalize? And therefore, in preparation for Rosh Chodesh Elul, I said, you know what, let's take a step back. Let's go back and examine in Chamisha Chumshei Torah what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is trying to teach us through Magefot. So as we know from any time we want to study a phenomenon in Tanakh, we go back to where the words appear. And this is very easily done now with the online concordances. I place the word Magefa in my computer, my database system. And in fact, Magefa does appear, but not in Chamisha Chumshei Torah, plenty of times in Nevi'im Achronim, certainly in Divrei Hayamim. And then I realized that the terminology that I'm looking for is actually not Magefa, it's not the objective plague, but when Am Yisrael find themselves ba Magefa, in the midst of a pandemic, in which we know we still are. So in fact, we find that there are three, no more, no less, times that the word ba magefa appears in Chamisha Chumshei Torah. And therefore, together this Rosh Chodesh Elul, we're going to examine what we're supposed to be learning from a magefa. How, particularly in the month of Elul, what type of teshuvah are we supposed to be performing? How do we return to Hashem if we don't even know what we did wrong? What messages we're supposed to be internalizing? Well, here we're going to examine them together. So with your permission, we're going to now take a look at these three examples in Tanakh, the three times where we find an Eya b'magefa phenomenon. So as we get started with teshuvah in the wake-up pandemic, we're going to examine this together. So we're going to look at this now. Just trying to see. Okay. Not to move the makorot a little here. Excellent. Let's begin with the first b'magefa. The very first one is actually one that shouldn't surprise us. It's actually not Chet HaEgel, albeit a national sin, a sin of idolatry. But isn't that interesting? That's not where Am Yisrael are punished with a magefa. Of course, they're punished. You know, we find that Moshe Rabbeinu is going to force those who actually sinned in the sin of Avodah Zarah, in the Chet HaEgel, to drink from the molten gold. But the first time that there is a plague is with regard to the sin of the spies, Chet HaMeraglim. And let's look and examine the Chet and the magefa, which we're going to be doing thrice over. We begin by Dabar Hashem Moshe bel Aaron Lemor. After the people, the spies have come back with their negative report, Efes ki asa am hayoshe ba'aretz, despite the fact that it's a beautiful land and you can see the fruit of the land, Eretz Tovah, but still, again, we are like chagavim, we're like grasshoppers in the eyes of all the giants there. There's no way that we're going to conquer this country. And Hashem then responds to Moshe and Aaron, Ad matai le'idah hara'a hazot, asher hima malinim alai, et tlunot b'nei Yisrael, asher hima malinim alai, shamati. And how many times are they going to complain? But you know what, says Hashem, this complaint is different than any other complaint, because this is a complaint about the land. I promised them that part of the national destiny of the descendants of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov was going to be that they're going to enter the land. But now, im atem tavo el haaretz asher nasati et yadi l'shaken etchem ba, ki im Kaleb ben Yefune v'Yoshua ben Nun. But obviously, you don't appreciate coming to the land, and therefore, only those who demonstrated not only belief, but those who demonstrated a love for the land and encouragement for the rest of Am Yisrael to join. And in Alona Alek Yachonu Chala, Kalev and Yoshua, they're going to come. But I hate to tell you this, not you, because it's the Aretz Asher Ma'astem Ba. This generation, shame on those who literally and did not come when they should. Shame on those who despise the land. And therefore, says Hashem, you're going to have to go ahead and wander in the desert for the next 40 years. In other words, you don't want to go into the land? Okay, so now you're going to be with your children. Take a look at this. And notice how Hashem describes this terminology. You're going to not only die in the midbar, but b'nechem uvnechem yu roim b'midbar arba'im shana. Your children are going to be like animals. They're going to be literally grazing in this wilderness for 40 years until you all die. Just like the 40 days in which you sojourned in the land of Eretz Yisrael. So too, a very famous terminology that we find also in Sefer Yecheskel, Yom Lishana Tesuat Avonotechem, a year for every day that you were in Eretz Yisrael, namely 40 years. V'yadatem et tnuati ani Hashem dibarti im lo zot esel cholei dara zot anoadim alai b'midbar hazeh yitamu b'sham yamutu. You're going to die off in this midbar as your children basically are going to be literally climbing the walls. And I think sometimes when people have been complaining, oh no, my children have to go back to school. When are they going back to school already? I think of these psukim. I think maybe HaKadosh Baruch Hu really is giving us a message. Let's take a look. Vayamutu anashim motzei dibat haaretz. Now we find the terminology, those who were first in vandalizing, literally, Eretz Yisrael, those who were motzei dibat haaretz ra'ah, they died in a pandemic. And the Parshanim even asked, what was this pandemic? What did they die in? And Rashi quotes the famous Midrashei Chazal, they died with some type of pandemic of the tongue. There were worms that came out from their throat and they swallowed their tongues. And it must have had something to do, Midah Keneged Midah, with Lashon Hara, with using their tongues in an improper manner. But as we continue in the Psukim, we wonder that maybe this Magifa is actually just a prelude to the next few psukim that talk about another Magifa. And what is this? We hear that the very next day. And now the people, when they hear about their punishment of 40 years, they're all in a state of mourning. So what did they do? They think the message is as follows, Pasuk Mem, Vayashkimu baboker, Vayalu el rosh hahar lemor. Hinenu valinu el hamakom asher amar Hashem ki chatanu. They recognize right away, what beautiful tshuva, we sinned, we did something wrong, and now we want to make up for it. So what did they do? We want to now go up and enter Eretz Yisrael. But Moshe tells them, no, now you can't, because lama zeh atem ovrim et pi Hashem. At this point, it's too late. HaKadosh Baruch Hu already said that you have to suffer this punishment. V'hi lo tetzlach. As a matter of fact, al talu ki ein Hashem b'kirbachem. HaKadosh Baruch Hu isn't even in your midst right now. V'lo tinakfu lifnei oivechem. And you do not want to die in a pandemic, literally in front of your enemies. Because you should know, what pandemic is he referring to? The attack. You're going to die through the Amalekites and the Canaanites who are in the southern areas of Eretz Yisrael. They're going to come and they're going to attack you. They were going to come to attack no matter what, because they've been anticipating your entrance from the southern border of Eretz Yisrael, which is exactly why Moshe Rabbeinu sent the Meraglim from the southern part of Eretz Yisrael, not only as the Ramban says, to prepare for war, but also to get them excited, to make them realize that they can enter the land. And what do you know? The Meraglim themselves, these Anashim Tarim, the leaders of the people, they came in through the south, but because you didn't have sufficient emunah, now it's too late. Now those same southern enemies, the Canaanim, the Amalekim, they're going to come and they're going to attack you, which is exactly as we see what happens, namely the last few psukim here. Vayapilu la'alot el rosh hahar, va'aron brit Hashem u'Moshe lo mashu mikerav hamachaneh. But the Aron, which is supposed to lead us in our journeys in the desert, does not accompany Yisrael, does not accompany what we call these ma'apilim, the ones who are going to rise up to go into the land of Israel, despite Hashem telling them not to. Vayeret hamaleki v'knani hayoshe b'harahu vayakum vayaktum ad hachorma. This is a continuation of the Mageifa, and maybe in fact, it's actually the punishment of the Meraglim. Maybe the same 10 spies who just a few hours earlier said, Efes kiyas ha'am, no, I'm telling you, you don't want to enter the land of Israel. Maybe they're the ones who said, oh my, now that the door is closed on us, now we want to go into the land of Israel. Now we have to pick ourselves up and go. And Moshe Rabbeinu says, but now it's too late. You didn't get the message on time. And in fact, their punishment is not only that they're going to be attacked, but they're going to be completely obliterated. All those who go up, ad ha-chorma. The term chorma means a place wherein they're annihilated. So notice then that the punishment is not just that they're going to wander around the wilderness for 40 years, but rather that those who are going to try to fix their sin are ultimately going to pay the price. But don't worry, what's the tshuva then? Message number one, what's the tshuva that we're supposed to be performing? What should we do? And already now, I hope that everyone's internalizing perhaps some messages that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is telling us. This is the first time my father, who was here, and my parents during the initial stages of Corona, and they noted for the first time that even as Jews, they couldn't come back to Eretz Yisrael. And they said, I guess we just have to make Aliyah. And you've heard Rabbi Reisman speak about this, that now we're, again, those in Chutz La'aretz on the wrong side of the door. Maybe this is one message that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is giving us. Did you ever think that the door to Eretz Yisrael would be closed as it was during the time of Chet HaMeraglim? Now is the time, and we're going to see this clearly. Message number one, Teshuvah is not just individual teshuvahs, we're going to see from the Psukim, but national teshuvah. National teshuvah, which is about obviously returning to mitzvah observance, but also returning to our national identities. Our national identities that we hear about over and over again in the parshios that we've been reading in Sefer Devarim, in this time period of Chodesh Elul. These are the parshiot that teach us that, of course, we have to be scrupulous in our mitzvah observance, but simultaneously, we have to recognize our national identity connected to Eretz Yisrael. Message number one, Mageifa number one, when we don't appreciate what it means to enter the land of Israel. But don't worry, there's Teshuvah. What Teshuvah? Let's take a look. The Teshuvah, the Tikkun, believe it or not, comes in fact 40 years later, and the Torah tells us exactly how. Number one, it comes, unfortunately, together with the loss of leadership, not only the famous notorious sin of Mei Meribah, and with the imminent passing of Miriam together with Moshe, but also of Aaron. We hear about Aaron who dies b'hor hahar. We hear about the loss of Gedolei Torah. We hear about the mourning of Am Yisrael, as we see. Vayamat Aaron Sham, and Vayeru kol ha'ida ki gava Aaron vayivku et Aaron shloshim yom kol beit Yisrael. To recognize that it's a new generation, that sometimes we have to wait, even for the passing of Gedolim, in order for us to get the message that they were trying to impart all along. And what happens right after? What do you know? As Am Yisrael are now preparing for their entrance to Eretz Yisrael, as on one hand, they find that the people of Edom aren't allowing them to enter, and soon they're going to be waging war against the Amorites. And in fact, we can definitely imagine how the people are going to perhaps rebel once again and not want to enter the land. But this time, almost the exact same scenario, just as the Rambam tells us, true Teshuvah is when you're in the same situation, but you respond differently. What's the response of Am Yisrael this time? It's not enough that they said chatanu and now we want to make up for it. Rather, this time, the Canaanim again, and the southern areas of Eretz Yisrael, Vayishma HaKnani, Melech Harad, Yosef HaNegev, Ki Yisrael Derech HaTarim. It's now 38 years later, and once again, the Canaanim say, oh, now the Israelites are going to try once again to come and conquer the land of Israel through the southern area. Vayilachem b'Yisrael, Vayish mimenu shevi. And they fight against Am Yisrael, and they take prisoners. Rashi says it was actually a Shivcha Knanit Echad. It was actually just one prisoner, and she was even a Shivcha Knanit. Nonetheless, Am Yisrael doesn't leave anyone behind. And this is not going to intimidate them. On the contrary, this is what's going to encourage them to do something very differently than what they've done before, which is passively respond, which is to react to punishment instead of being proactive. This time, by Yidar Yisrael neder laHashem, this time Am Yisrael accept a neder upon themselves. They commit themselves to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And just to remind you that in the Chumash, we find that a neder, certainly in Sefer Bereshit with Yaakov Abinu, is something very positive. It's basically a way of committing ourselves to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even when we don't have the means to actually pay or fulfill our obligations and our commitments, but we want to show HaKadosh Baruch Hu that we are committed. So we make a neder. Hashem, we will do this. We just need your help right now, but we're going to pay on credit, basically. And that's why the Nazir, says the Ramban, is positive as well. It's a positive neder. And this is obviously a positive neder because we're going to see that HaKadosh Baruch Hu listens. It's only in Sefer Devarim, where then the Torah says, motas vatacha tishmor, be careful with what you're going to commit yourself to, but take a look at this national neder. All of Am Yisrael say, if you allow us to attack the Knanim, then we're going to declare them chirim to you. Then we're going to recognize that this all came from you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Maybe that's our tshuva now. Maybe we're supposed to learn from this Magifa, not only not to speak negatively about Eretz Yisrael, but maybe this is what we're supposed to learn, that it's time to be proactive. And maybe after the War of Independence and the Six-Day War and all of the phenomenal victories that we've had, Baruch Hashem, and against all chances of survival of a tiny nation amidst enemies of the Middle East, maybe we haven't recognized that this all comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And Am Yisrael say, Hashem, if we're going to win, we know that it was completely because of you. Vayishma Hashem b'kol Yisrael vayitena taknani vayicharem atem betarehem vayikra shem hamakom chorma. They renamed the place. What do you know? Chorma, exactly as we found beforehand. This is the tshuva. This is the tikkun. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we're going to come into Eretz Yisrael, where we're going to do it right this time. We're going to come in of our initiative. We're going to show you how enthused we are. And at the same time that we recognize, not only that we have the emunah, that you're going to help us win our wars, but we know with full confidence that this is what you want us to do. Not that we have to say chatanu, and then we're going to try to come when it's too late. No, Hashem, we're going to be proactive. We're going to recognize that you want us to come to Eretz Yisrael, and we are also going to recognize that if we make it there, then it's completely because of Yad Hashem. Magifa, number one. Tshuva, number one, that we're supposed to learn in the wake of a pandemic. Number two, the next time that we find the term Magifa, the next pandemic, is within the context, as you see, of Korach Ba'adato. So let's explore once again the sin, but particularly the plague. What happens at the beginning of Parshat Korach? We hear that there are really two simultaneous rebellions going on that share the same zeitgeist, the same spirit. Korach ben Yitzhar ben Kahat ben Levi, together with Datan and Abiram of Bnei Reuven, they come to Moshe and Aaron and they say, Rav lachem, ki chol haida kulam k'doshim uvetocham Hashem. You're holding on to too many different positions. And why? Madua titnasu al kahal Hashem? Why are you usurping political power, religious power, priestly power? And you're holding literally the executive branch and the judicial branch and the political branch. This isn't fair. And Moshe Rabbeinu says, but don't you understand? I didn't choose these positions. These came from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So you want to, let's start with your primary argument. You want to serve as Kohanim. You want to get close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu like a Kohen bringing Ketoret. So you know what? Try it. I want to show you it wasn't about me. I'm not usurping any powers. Rather, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the one who endowed me with this. So you know what? Let's see. Maybe HaKadosh Baruch Hu also endowed you with these religious powers. Take machtot, take riddles. Again, Korach, together with all of his 250 men, place some fire, some coals, place the Ketoret, and we'll see whom HaKadosh Baruch Hu selects. In the meantime, we also hear about Nadav and Avihu, whom, as we know, and refused to come up to Moshe and Aaron. And Moshe then responds to them as well in Pasuk Chavchet, B'zot tedun, ki Hashem shlachani lasot et kol ha'maasim ha'eleh. Don't start decrying my position as political leader and that I can't bring you into Eretz Yisrael. And this is not about me. It's about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I am merely the intermediary. I'm the vassal for God for all these miracles. And I'll prove, Kilom Libi, that this isn't me. As a matter of fact, and I'm going to tell you that if Datam and Aviram now die in a very strange way, and if, for example, the earth opens up, if the earth opens up with its own peh, with its own mouth, and then swallows them alive, then you'll know, then you'll know that certainly this is a punishment from God, that Hashem is working in tandem together with me, because it's not my powers. This is all from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And sure enough, as we know, that's exactly what happens. And it's not about me, says Moshe Rabbeinu, Vatibaka damasher tachtehim, Vativtacha aretz et piha, Vativla utam vet batehem, vet kol hadam asher lekorach, vet kol harachush, ve'erduhem b'chol asher lahem chayim she'ola. But believe it or not, this isn't the Magefa that is spoken about. This is the punishment for both Datan and Aviram, and then by the end we hear the 250 men together with Korach, the Makrivei HaKtoret, also die. Rather, what's the tshuva? What's the tikkun? What's the aftermath of all this? Well, Hadat B'nai Yisrael, all of Am Yisrael see that Moshe told the 250 men in Korach, go and bring Ketoret, and they died because Moshe Rabbeinu suggested this. And then he also initiated this truly remarkable punishment for Datan and Aviram. So in their minds, Atem Hamitem et Am Hashem, they claim. Oh my, you're killing the nation of Hashem. And they start once again to harass Moshe and Aaron. So Moshe and Aaron come to the Ohel, Vayiplu al Pneihem, and they're going to turn to Hashem. And Hashem says, hey, Roman mitoch haidazot b'chala otam karega, just like with Korach, I am going to kill them instantaneously. Vayiplu al Pneihem. You're going to see that there's going to be something that spreads that kills them automatically. And what's going to happen? We're going to hear that just in a matter of seconds, there is a magefa, hechel hanagef, the term of magefa. There's a pandemic. And Moshe Rabbeinu knows that this pandemic is coming from HaKadosh Baruch Hu to protect the honor of Moshe and Aaron. And therefore, Moshe says, he could have saved, again, a few seconds and done this on his own, but he understands even he, the great leader of Am Yisrael, he doesn't even have the power of the vaccine of the Ketoret. That's something that only a Kohen can bring. And therefore, Moshe turns to Aaron and says, Vayomer Moshe el Aaron, show them that you are the only one who can bring Ketoret, but you're not using Ketoret to kill them. You're using Ketoret to keep them alive. The Magefa begins. And we know that what happens in this Magefa, we hear that 14,700 are going to die, that Aaron stands between those that are dead and those that are alive because Hashem has manifested himself within the people. And just like by Makat Bechorot, wherein everyone died, Karega, we hear a similar idea, namely that so many people can die in one moment because they see the revelation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and Aaron protected them. And as you know, what's really going on within the dynamics of the story is what goes on perhaps in almost every generation, with regard to leadership and politics, challenging our systems, challenging authority in our systems. I think we all can relate not only to the Korach phenomenon, but exactly what Chazal tell us about this. And this is a machloket shelo l'shem shamayim, a machloket wherein not only is there internal debate, not only is there going to be truly disputes amongst the people themselves, as Chazal elaborate upon in numerous midrashim, but we see that the primary basis for the machloket of Korach ba'adato is their lack of respect for truly Gedolei Hador, their lack of respect for those authorities of Torah, the lack of respect for those who are meant to serve particular roles. And we look around and we see, and unfortunately, and in our generation, not only have we lost numerous Gedolim, but how unfortunately we don't have proper respect for those Torah authorities. Maybe HaKadosh Baruch Hu is teaching us during this time, Am Yisrael, Tefashvashu b'maasechem. Look at these magefot in Tanakh. Do you see any parallels? Maybe our generation is one that also doesn't respect the appointments of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that doesn't respect Torah scholarship and Torah in the forms of Gedolei Hador, so much so that we know that Rabbi Akiva is compared to Moshe Rabbeinu. In every generation, we have those that are meant to perpetuate the words of Torah. And therefore, what does Hashem do right afterwards? It's not enough. That Aaron stopped the Magifa, that Aaron showed through in his not only understanding, but the commandments of Moshe, go and take the Ketoret, v'hamagifan etzara. Hashem says that's not enough. Now I want to show who a true Gadol is. So take your matot. Each one of the tribal leaders has to take their staff. It's not just about the matot, the griddles, but the matot. And it's only, as we know, the staff of Aaron that is going to blossom, that is going to not only blossom, but also bear almonds. Teaching us that there are certain positions in every generation that are going to be continued, that we have to recognize the appointments of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Torah authorities that are consistent in every generation, that this is part of our Mesorah. Moshe kibel Torah misinai, u'masara liYoshua, v'Yoshua l'skenim, skenim to Nevi'im. We have leadership in our time, and the question is, are we properly respecting them? And maybe this Magefa, and I mean it, this Magefa of Corona has come so that, as we know, and in every community across the world, we've been looking towards our rabbinic leaders, not just our doctors, but also our spiritual guiders, the leaders who are supposed to tell us what to do. Is it time to go back to shul? How should we do this? And obviously we have to learn how to work together, but at the same time, to respect, to show in every kihila that we can pay proper respect and listen to the Rabbanim, even though in every generation we also know we kvetch so much. Really, madua tzitznasu, why you see the rabbi? Again, not me. And the story of Korach reminds us, if you don't understand Torah authorities, if you don't respect them properly, then beware, because there may in fact come a magefa. That's the tikkun, not only for the generation of Korach, but for our generation as well. And now we progress to the third time that the Magifa appears, and that's the sin and the plague of Baal Peor. Right after Bilam has, as we know, blessed Am Yisrael, not only 3 times against his will, but then of his own initiative, Ma Tovu, O Alacha Yaakov, Mishkanotacha Yisrael, recognizing the privacy of Am Yisrael, recognizing, as Rashi says twice over, that he sees not only how one person can't look into one another's tent, but every shevet is divided. There are clear families, there are clear tribal identities. Every family has its own identity. What happens right afterwards? That's when we find that all family values are going to go down the drain. Bilam, together with Balak, he understands that that's the secret of Jewish survival in particular. And therefore, as Chazal teach us, he is the one behind this Chet Baal Peor, wherein the women of Moab and Midian come and they seduce Am Yisrael Lizboach le'Elohehen to be involved in a promiscuous form of idolatry, of Baal Peor, which also was all about not controlling one's bodily functions, all about completely debasing any sense of refinement and proper culture within the camp of Bnei Israel. And therefore Hashem tells Moshe, go and call the leaders, tell them to stop this. And unfortunately, no one stops this until Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aharon HaKohen. He gets up with his spear and he is going to put an end, not just to the acts of Zimri and Cosby, who are openly engaged in this idolatry, in this promiscuous form of Avodah and Gilui Arayo together, but finally, Bateatzer HaMagifa mi'al Bnei Yisrael. And if the previous Magifa, and the first Magifa of Chet HaMaraglim killed that entire generation of people, basically, and anyone aged 20 above, and that's 600,000 males. And then the second Magifa killed 14,700. This Magifa kills 24,000. 24,000 died in this Magifa. Imagine what that means. There are now 24,000 widows in Am Yisrael, at least. There are 24,000 plus orphans within Am Yisrael. And in addition to Hashem responding with a Brit Shalom for the zealousness of Pinchas against Cosby and Zimri, Hashem then tells Moshe that's not enough. It's not enough that there was a Magifa. Now go to the source of it. Saroret hamidyanim v'yikitamotam. Look at the debased culture of those that are surrounding you and fight against it. Kitzorim hem lachem v'nechlehem asher neklu lachem al dvar pa'or. Al dvar kazbi bat nasi midyan achotam hamuka b'yom ha'magifa al dvar pa'or. And what's so interesting is that we'd expect now that Moshe Rabbeinu heard, okay, now amass the people and go out to wage war against the Midianites, against those that started, that basically debased the culture of Am Yisrael. We hear something quite fascinating. Immediately, the ensuing pasuk tells us, and there's an atnachta, there's a pause within the pasuk, and then the rest of the line is the parshiya ptucha. Hashem tells Moshe, actually, su'uet rosh kol adat b'nei Yisrael miben 20 shana v'mala, which is so strange, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu just said, go out and wage war. And then we're not going to hear about the war until Parak Lamed Aleph, wherein HaKadosh Baruch Hu repeats, Nikom nikmat b'nei Yisrael metamid yanim achar te'asef elamacha. Moshe Rabbeinu, go out and take vengeance against the Midianim who started off this terrible Magifa caused by the sin of Al Peor, and then you will die. And all the Parshanim ask this question: why is there a separation? Why does HaKadosh Baruch Hu command Moshe to fight against the Midianim? And then there's a non sequitur, or basically a few non sequiturs. There is this entire commandment that is held in abeyance until it's actually executed, until it's fulfilled. And the Chizkuni explains, well, maybe it's in order to prepare Moshe Rabbeinu for his death. Okay, then why tell Moshe at the beginning, okay, go ahead and fight against the Midianim? And perhaps if we look at what HaKadosh Baruch Hu commands Moshe Rabbeinu to do before Am Yisrael are going to fight against the Midianim, maybe we can appreciate proper Teshuvah. And there is a Magefa that destroys families of Am Yisrael. We know of all too many families over the past few weeks and months that have been destroyed, literally destroyed, because of the Magefa, because of the corona pandemic in which we find ourselves, and orphans left without parents, without grandparents, and wives without their husbands, and husbands without their wives. And let's take a look and see. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, do you realize what just happened? Not only did you completely undermine the culture of Kedusha of Am Yisrael, you engaged in a riot that we know is the antithesis of Kedoshim Tiyu, that Am Yisrael have taught, and have been learning for the past 40 years in the Midbar. And now that those families are destroyed, now HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, you're going to have to solve this. You're going to have to fight against the cultures around you. But before you do, rebuild your own culture. Or in other words, rebuild your own families. Let's take a look. What's the very first mitzvah that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says before they go and fight against the Midianim? Hashem says, okay, now it's time to once again count B'nai Yisrael. Su'u et rosh kol adat B'nai Yisrael mi ben 20 shana v'mala. Conduct a census. But this time, as opposed to what we find at the beginning of Sefer Bamidbar, when they counted according to their Beit Av, they counted according to big clans within every tribe. This time, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I want you to count Reuven Bechor Yisrael B'nei Reuven Chanoch Mishpachat HaChanochi Lepalu Mishpachat HaPalui. Don't just count clans. I want every single family counted. I want you to fix those broken homes. I want you to build families anew. And I think that this message is obvious. A message that if we didn't even see the word b'magefa in the Torah, we would understand that that's exactly what's going on today. This is a Magefa where HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, in your homes, everyone in your homes, everyone go back to your home. No starim in a hotel, no community starim, everyone in your home. And not even with your extended mishpacha, with your immediate mishpacha, mishpachat hachanochi, lepalu mishpachat hachanochi. Each one of us redefining ourselves as a family, fighting against the culture of postmodernism, which is all about the breakdown of family units, fighting against all different types of renewed identities within the family. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, go back into your bayit, go back and count B'nai Yisrael. And if you're not convinced, then what happens also as part of this Teshuvah and Tikkun process, we hear afterwards, And now we find the very next story is the story of Benot Tzlofchad. Benot Tzlofchad, who are introduced as follows. Who are these Benot Tzlofchad? Ben Chefer, Ben Gilad, Ben Machir, Ben Menashe, Lemishpachot Menashe, Ben Yosef. Going all the way back to Yosef, redefining their family identity. And then we hear the Shemot of every single bat. It's not just the sons, but also the daughters. You just heard about 5 sons. Now you're going to hear about 5 daughters. Machla and Noah and Chagla and Milcah and Tirzah. And what's their argument before Moshe Rabbeinu? Wait a second, Moshe. We basically just experienced Baal Peor. And if we don't inherit the lands of our father, it's not about us, but Lama Yigara Shem Avinu Mitoch Mishpachto, then our father's family identity is going to be lost. Then there isn't anyone to continue his family line. And that's why HaKadosh Baruch Hu says this is the perfect time. Chazal tell us that Benot Tzlofchad words, Chachamot, Tzidkaniyot, that they knew that this was the right time, the time to restore family identity. Make sure that the family name and legacy is going to be preserved, certainly in Eretz Yisrael. And in case you're still not convinced, right before Am Yisrael go and fight against the Midyanim, one last mitzvah. Moshe Rabbeinu tells Bnei Yisrael, particularly the Rashi Hamatot, particularly the leaders. He says, okay, when you make a neder, which we've already learned is wonderful, and even Bali Tosfot explain, that's why on one hand, we are very cautious with our nedarim. And that's why, as you know, coming up very soon, and on Rosh Hashanah, Erev Rosh Hashanah, we're all going to recite Hataret Nidarim. And then again, on Yom Kippur, Kol Nidre, we're all going to annul all our Nidarim. But the Bali Tosfot says, actually, the Nidarim are not just the Nidarim for the past, that perhaps we committed ourselves, to davening Shacharis and Mincha every day and we didn't fulfill it. Perhaps we committed ourselves to lighting Shabbos candles even 5 minutes before our 18 minutes. And we didn't necessarily do that. Again, all of these commitments that we made, Bali Tosfot says they're not just commitments of the past, they're also commitments of the future. Because Dafkan Chodesh Elul, when we hear the neder, for example, of Chana, Dafkan Chodesh Elul, of course, like any New Year's resolutions, we want to recommit ourselves to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore we're told, like we saw after the Magefa of Chaitam Raglim, it's okay, recommit yourself, make nedarim, but be very careful. Because if a wife makes a neder that affects her husband, or a daughter makes a neder that affects her father can in fact annul it. But only if, and the milah mancha, the repetitive word throughout this section is vishama abiha. Vishama shamo kol nedareha. Vishama isha, her husband heard. Biyom shamo, v'im biyom shamo isha, yani. And appearing no less than 8 times. Vishama, vishama, vishama. This parsha is all about fathers, listen to your daughters. Husbands, listen to your wives. Basically, you want to solve a problem of a magifa that destroys the family, go back into your homes and listen to each other. I don't know about you, but I definitely know that I've had more conversations, especially with my 17-year-old son, the past few months than I probably had the past 2 years. I've had more conversations with my children, more time with my grandchildren than I can ever remember. Maybe that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is teaching us. Maybe this is one of the messages of Teshuvah, this Elul, more than any other Elul. Do Teshuvah for a Magefa. Go back to your families. Listen to each other. Make sure that you abide and reestablish yourselves. Mishpachat HaChanochi. Re-educate yourself based on Jewish values. And when you do that, then you're going to be re-edified to be able to finally stand against your enemies and the culture of your enemies. Only after this do we hear that it's time tzror et hamidyanim. Only when we're strong families are we then, as we know, going to be a strong nation that can withstand the cultures that attempt to infiltrate Am Yisrael. And that's why this story then continues to the very end of Sefer Bamidbar. Once you're a strong mishpacha, an individual family, then you can also be a strong tribe again. Then the tribe of Menashe says, wait a second, the Notzlovchad, we don't want them marrying out into another tribe. And Hashem says, the people of Menashe are also right. You also then have to build strong communities. And once you're a strong tribe, then you can be a strong nation. But the basis is going to be to reestablish your bayit. It's already now Aleph Elul in Eretz Yisrael. And starting now, literally now, or I'll be honest, in 10 minutes from now, about 4 feet away, or Daled Amot from my door, there's a Mariv minyan. And we're going to have the schut to begin to say, as the Mishnah Brura teaches us in Ashkenazi communities, to begin to say, Le David Hashem Ori B'Yishi Mimi Ira, to begin to say Mizmor Chav Zayin. And as we say Mizmor Chav Zayin, this Elul more than any other Elul, when we ask, Achat Sha'alti Me'et Hashem Ota Avakesh, Hashem, what do we ask for? Shivti B'Veit Hashem Kol Yemei Chayai. I guarantee that many of us are going to be thinking of how much we miss our Beit Knesset, how much we miss our shuls, how much we miss the routine of having a chavrusa on our base medrash, how much we miss a Rosh Chodesh year when we can get together with our friends and learn Torah together. How much you miss coming to the Kotel and davening, how much you long for all the more the Beis HaMikdash. And the Netivot Shalom explains, he says, guess what? When you say that, you know what you should be thinking? Masha Omer, David HaMelech, Achat Sha'alti Me'es Hashem Ota Vakesh, Mizmor Chav Zayin, Shivti B'Veit Hashem Kol Yemei Chayai. You think that that's what David HaMelech really meant? Ech Efshar Kol Yemei Chayecha. He really wanted to sit in the Beis HaMikdash every single day of his life. Yamim v'leilot Teshuvah B'Veit Hashem. Is that really what you want? You really want to be in the Beis HaMikdash, or even in your Beit Knesset, day in and day out, night and day, lo tochal v'lo tishteh. You're not allowed to eat in a Beit Knesset, in a Beis Medrash, in a Beis HaMikdash. So what? You're not going to eat, you're not going to drink. Lo titaber b'nei hamishpacha v'hachaverim. You're not going to talk to your friends and family, which you should not be doing in a Beit Knesset, definitely not in the Beis HaMikdash. Rather, says the Nesivos Shalom, hakavana hi shebeit Hashem yehabayit shelach, or shelcha, but shelach in this case. את לומדת, מפרנסת, מגדלת ילדים, ואת מתפללת, ששם תרגיש שכינה כל ימיך. That really what we're asking for is that our bayit, here's our opportunity for the greatest teshuvah of this magefa. Transform your bayit into a Beit Hashem. That in every aspect, in your learning, in your livelihood, as you raise your children, this is the time to work on our mitos, how we speak to our children, how we listen to our children. When we say, maybe now for the first time in years, this mizmor every single day for the next 40 plus days through Shmini Atzeres, Ata mitpalel shesham targish china kol yemei chayecha. Hashem, achat sha'alti me'et Hashem ota vakesh shivti b'beis Hashem. Hashem, can you come into my home because I can't really get out of my home? So can you come into my home? Can you help me make my home that strong home of Kedusha? Can this be a home for Shechinat Hashem? And I'd like to end then with what we know of, Lekrat Chodesh Elul, these 3 messages of Magifa, these 3 messages of Teshuvah. We're taught that by different Rishonim and Achronim, that Elul is Rashi Tevot for so many different ideas, Ani L'Dodi V'Dodi Li, recognizing Shehu Remez L'Tfila, that of course we have to work on our Tfila. And this is each one of the words also ending with a yud, recognizing the gematria, 40 days until Yom Kippur, says the Bach, that obviously we should be working on our tefillah, but so too, we have to be working on ish l'reyehu, umatanot levyonim. We have to recognize the same acronym, v'hu remez laharbot b'yamim elu b'tzedakah. And we should recognize that this is a time, even though we're socially distant, to go out of our ways with acts of chesed and tzedakah. And umal Hashem elokechet levavcha vet levav zaracha. And this, as we know, also from the psukim of Sefer Devarim, umal Hashem elokecha. We're also taught that this is the time that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is basadeh, that we ask Hashem to circumcise our hearts. And what do you know? Another acronym for Elul, that this should be the time for Milat Halev, the circumcision of our hearts, says the Baal HaTurim, and the Shalah Ead Mistaber, Me'achar Shu HaChodesh HaCharon B'Shana Osim Bo Teshuvah Al Ma Shepagam Kol HaShana. This is a time to do teshuvah, to reflect upon definitely the past few months since Adar time, to reflect in particular for how we can respect our Gedolim more, for how we can rebuild our homes more, for how we can express a greater love and anticipation and excitement to return to Eretz Yisrael. Elul is also Rashi Tevot for, in Shmo Perach Chaf Aleph, we hear Asher Lo Tada Velokim Mina Liyado, for cases of a Rotzeach B'Shogeg, Af HaShogeg Tzarech Teshuvah. even for those unintentional, even if you're all saying, Shani, this is so redundant. We've heard these messages so many times. Perhaps we have, but this is the time to review them once more, that maybe we haven't even recognized how it hasn't been foremost in our consciousness. And therefore, I want to end with one last, and please forgive me that I had to cut and paste directly out of the Chidushei Harim, who says, you know, there is another beautiful acronym for Chodesh Elul. And this is what we recite in Tehillim and on Kabbalah Shabbos, V'lo anachnu. And he says, look at this, Al Chodesh Elul shehem lo anachnu b'tzon marito. He says, what does that mean? The lo anachnu. He says, if you read it as the lo, there's a kriyuchtiv, either Hashem created us and we didn't, or Hashem created us and therefore we belong to him. Maybe the greatest message of this Elul, and the only way, he says, the Chidushei Harim says, V'lo anachnu, if you combine the Kri, Vav Lamed Aleph, with the Chtiv, and Vav Lamed Vav, or the opposite, and then Vav Lamed Aleph Vav, the acronym for Elul. Elul is the time to realize that we're not the ones who create, and we're not the ones who cure, but rather it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu. V'lo anachnu amo v'tzon marito. And not only are we therefore belonging and we're the avadim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but also v'lo anachnu. That it's not in our hands, but rather everything is in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's hands, and we're tzon marito. This Rosh Chodesh Elul, more than any other Rosh Chodesh Elul, we recognize how vulnerable we are. And we recognize that not only through incorporating tshuva, tefillah, and tzedakah will we be'ezrat Hashem merit refuah, but if we learn the messages of Magifa and Tanakh, then maybe if we just work a little bit harder on, firstly, our Ahavat Eretz Yisrael, and we work and we work a little bit harder on our respect for Gedolei Torah, and we work just a little bit harder on reestablishing family values, then Be'ezrat Hashem, then Met Na'virin et Roa HaGzera. I wish all of you a Chodesh Tov, a Chodesh of Refuah, and a Shana that will be truly Tova in every sense of the word. May we be Zocha this year for the Refuah Shlema, the Geula Krova, Hashta Lavo, Be'ezrat Hashem.
Thank you for words and really powerful impact frame of this. I think at a time where we're all really struggling for context, for direction, but also helping to move us forward and giving us some way that we can build ourselves, build our families, build our communities, so that we can, please God, journey through this and really v'shifti b'veis Hashem, that we can you in Eretz Yisrael. It's on some level, at least we're getting your voice, like we can connect, like our voices or our presence is in Israel in some virtual way, but we really want to be there in person. And please, we daven so hard that that we should all find ourselves on the other side of this, with all the brachos that Hashem can and will shower upon us. I want to thank those who have dedicated this year. So the year has been dedicated in honor of Fran Broder, and Fran Broder's Elul birthday by her family, in honor of Morris Zimmerman by Fern Amper, in memory of her parents, Mordechai Ben Yitzchak, Florence Bas Abraham Feigenbaum by
In memory of her parents, Mordechai Ben Yitzchak and Florence Bas Abraham Feigenbaum by Elaine J. of Boynton Beach, Florida. Thank you. Thank you for joining us, everybody, today. And thank you, Shani, again, for your most inspiring messages.
Thank you, Adina.
Okay, and thank you all. Thank you, Adina, for jumping in. I just want to make sure that this the video some programming has been acknowledged. It's dedicated to memory of our beloved grandma Fanny Lehman Vegaba Yaakov the Batsheva, and our beloved great-grandmother, Sophie Tao Batsheva Bat Yechiel, by Yitzhak and Barbara Lehman Siegel and family. Thank you for, please, if you haven't signed up yet, ou.org/win/YR for the Year Zone programming. And to support this type of programming, please consider contributing at ou.org/women/donates. Chodesh Tov, a meaningful Chodesh as we journey through Elul, through Yimei Ratzon together with the OU Women's Initiative. Chodesh Tov to all.
And for those who would like the makorot,
Thank you.
I'm trying to put it up as a chat. If you want to wait just literally one more moment. Is Ratz Hashem.
Okay, and we will also post that along with the link to this video program.
Okay, it's coming up right now. For those. Okay, sorry, 1 second. Here we go. Okay.